Hello and welcome to Good Nightmare, a podcast where a death row pardon always comes 2 minutes too late. Today's episode was a recommendation by my friend Tim Nichols, and you can find him on Twitter at TimScottNichols, Nichols spelt the same way as the coin. Smuttynose Island is one of the Isles of Shoals in the United States. It was named by fishermen who, upon seeing the island, noticed that the seaweed collected at one end gave it the look of a great sea animal with a dirty or a smutty nose. The island is best known for its association with a tragic double murder, the case that we'll be looking into today. In 1860, couple John and Maren Honvet moved to Smuttynose. For a while, they were the only couple inhabiting the island. John was a fisherman, and he would sail out to fish daily before travelling to New Hampshire to sell his catch, and then returning home to his wife. Maren kept house on the island. She had a small dog named Ringe, and she was said to keep a bright and happy home, decorating with plants on the windowsills and bright wallpapers. Though the couple were happy, Maren missed her life in Norway, where she had lived prior to moving to the Isle of Shoals. 2 years after moving to the island, the couple met newcomer Louis Wagner. Louis was 28, a well-built man who kept very quiet about his past. Though the Honvets would come to enjoy his company, the same couldn't be said for others who had interacted with him. Most people found him a little strange and a little too quiet. The couple noticed that Louis was down on his luck. He was struggling to make ends meet and was wanting for company, food, clothing, and income. And so the couple took him under their wing. The three became friends, and it wasn't long before John would invite him to be part of his company. It was in fact reported that Maren, Louis, and John would become as close as siblings. In May 1871, Maren's sister, Karen, came to the Isle of Shoals and was employed as a live-in maid on a neighbouring island to Smuttynose. Maren was concerned for her sister, who had suffered a heartache in Norway before coming to live nearby. However, being in close proximity, the sisters were able to visit and keep in touch, which reassured Maren that she could help to lift her sister's spirits. By 1972, the island would be met with more family members and friends. Louis Wagner moved into Honvet's home, and John's brother Matthew, Maren's brother Ivan, and Ivan's wife Anith came to live in the Honvet home as well. Anith and Ivan had been married since Christmas, and they were very much in love. It was a crowded but a very happy home by all accounts. It was in 1972 that John invited Louis to join his lucrative fishing crew, and all was well. Or so it seemed. Louis stayed with the Honvets for 5 weeks after the family and friends moved into the home, and then he went on to join a fishing crew on the schooner the Addison Gilbert. By November, he had left Smuttynose altogether. It seemed that fate had it in for Louis. The Addison Gilbert wrecked, and Louis found himself working along the Portsmouth wharves, earning less than a living wage. Within months, he was destitute. His clothes were worn through, and he owed 3 weeks' rent to the Johnsons, with whom he was living. On March 5, 1873, Matthew, John, and Ivan left to fish, per their usual routine. Karen, by this point, had ended her position as a live-in maid, and was now living with her sister Maren and Anith at their home. The men docked at Portsmouth and asked someone to send a message back to the women on the island. that they would not make it home that night due to strong winds. The women would be the only people on the island that night, and this would prove fatal for two of them. It was here at the docks that the men met Louis, who asked them if they would be returning to the island. They told him in passing that it was very likely they wouldn't be able to return until morning, due to the weather and awaiting the arrival of bait, which didn't look like it would come in time. It was 7:30 p.m. when Louis was last seen at the port. He was apparently aware that the bait had not arrived, and so the men would not be home. He is then said to have concocted a plan to burglarize the Honfet home. Louis Wagner reportedly then stole a boat and returned to Smuttynose Island, making the journey alone, which would come up in his defense at trial. It was a 12-mile journey, a lot for one man, but Louis was a skilled oarsman and had made the trip previously, many times, in a whaling boat. Having received the message early that afternoon that their husbands may not return home, it was around 10 p.m. when the women prepared for bed, having decided not to wait up any longer. Wagner reportedly watched from afar, waiting until the women retired for the night before entering the home when all was still and dark. The curtains had been left open that night as the weather was reasonably clear, allowing him to see into the home. According to Marin's testimony, which is ultimately what convicted Louis, it was Karen who woke first. Since coming to stay on Smuttynose Island with her sister, Karen had been sleeping in the kitchen on a lounge. The lock to the front door was broken and had been for some time, so the intruder was able to enter quietly. Upon waking, Karen was startled to see a man standing in the home. She called out to her sister underneath that John had scared her. This roused Marin underneath, who was sleeping in the bedroom they shared nearby. It was around this time, or during the following events, that the clock in the kitchen fell to the floor and stopped at exactly 1:07 a.m., recording the time of the crime and murders. Louis, mistaken for John, picked up a chair from beside him and struck Karen. She began to call out to Marin underneath that John had killed her, her injuries proving life-threatening. Marin attempted to open the bedroom door but found it was latched shut. She struggled with it, while on the other side, Karen was being attacked. Marin managed to get the door open in time to see her sister, slumped under the kitchen table. Marin took her sister by the arm and told her to hold the door while she opened the window for the three women to escape. Karen, however, gravely injured, told her sister that she couldn't run. She couldn't so much as get to the window. She was too tired. While pulling her sister into the bedroom, Marin had her back to the attacker and was struck twice with the same chair. When she couldn't urge her sister to leave via the window, she called to Aneeth to escape, to run and call for help. Aneeth made it just outside the window, but frozen with fear, she was unable to run or call out. That is, until she saw the attacker approaching. It was then, under the light of the moon, that she hollered his name, Louis. He was within arm's reach from the window, and Marin was able to see him here as well. Louis approached Aneeth with an axe that had been kept at the home and struck her in the head with the blade. Again, Marin tried to urge Karen to escape with her and run, but Karen was unable to save herself. Marin felt that they may have more chance of survival if the two went separate ways, and so when Louis headed back toward the house, she fled through the open window, past the hen house, and out toward the dock. She'd hoped to find Louis's boat there, so that she could escape, but came across none. Her dog Ringe stayed close, but she was afraid he would bark and alert Louis to her presence, so she ran, and she hid amongst rocks for the remainder of the night. It is at this point that Louis is thought to have dragged Enith's body back inside the house, where he turned on the lights in the home, made tea and a meal, and eventually left with $15. Marin did not leave her hiding place until just after sunrise. She flagged down children on a neighbouring island in the morning, and George, a man living on the island, sailed over to meet Marin and with her discovered the bodies. Ivan, John and Matthew were alerted to the crime and were told to come home immediately. The island was searched, but there was no suspect to be found. It appeared Louis had escaped. John, Ivan and Matthew conveyed the story to authorities, as relayed by Marin. Wagner's description and whereabouts were given to the police, and he was found quickly. He was in new clothing and was headed to Boston, where he would eventually end up. He was arrested, and after his arrest he was transferred from a local jail to Boston, among a crowd of hundreds who had heard of his terrible crime. And by the time he reached Portsmouth, it is said that a mob of thousands had gathered. Trial took place on the 9th of June 1872. There was a total of 9 days' testimony, and the jury took only 55 minutes of deliberation to find Wagner guilty, as charged. Marin gave her testimony at trial, which is ultimately what convicted Wagner of the double murder. She was, after all, the only surviving eyewitness. Though Wagner would proclaim his innocence until his end. Within the week of being sentenced, Wagner broke out of prison, but he was quickly recaptured. During the trial, Wagner's only defence seemed to be that it would be too difficult for one man to row from the docks back to Smuttynose Island, though it was found by the prosecution and the jury that while this would have been difficult, it could be done, especially by a man familiar with the trip, who had sailing experience like he had, and who had made the trip several times previously in a whaling boat. It's said that Marin once confronted Louis in his cell before his trial. She was weak, and so she laid on a couch placed by the cell for her and simply stared at him. Wagner reportedly told her, "I am glad Jesus loves me." To which her husband John replied, "The devil loves you." On June 25, 1875, Louis Wagner was hanged. The aftermath of his crime was devastating and would leave many people broken in its wake. Marin and John moved to Portsmouth shortly after the crime, no longer having a reason to stay on the island, nor any desire. Ivan, devastated at the loss of his new wife and greatest love, was described as a broken man. He remained on Smuttynose Island until the end of summer, before moving home to Norway, where he faded into obscurity. It is said that he never recovered. While I can't think of a single reason that Marin would have to lie about her testimony, it's a little bit strange how some things just don't seem to add up. Why would Louis want to rob someone who was apparently as close to him as a sibling? Where was his boat? That Marin wouldn't be able to find it. And if it wasn't there, how on earth did he get back off the island before anyone could find him? Though everything does tie up quite neatly and Wagner does make the perfect suspect, it's interesting to speculate why he was the only suspect, when surely several people knew about the women's situation, that they were living alone on an island and that their husbands wouldn't be home. Wagner also did protest his innocence until the day that he was hanged, though I'm fully aware that plenty of guilty people would do the same. What do you think? Was he too perfect as a suspect? Did he take the fall for someone else? Or did he commit these crimes? If you have a moment, I would love to hear from you, either in the Facebook group, which you can find at Good Nightmare Pod, on Twitter or Instagram at goodnightmare_s, or you can shoot me an email, goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. If you have a moment to rate, review and subscribe or share my podcast with a friend, as always, that would be greatly appreciated. And please send in any episode suggestions if you have them. Thank you again so much for listening. And stay tuned for a promo from a podcast which I highly recommend. Until next time, sweet dreams.
There are many true crime podcasts available, each offering a different perspective to the genre.
Each with their own niche that pulls the listener in by tugging at their heartstrings or their funny bone in one way or another.
What we aim to do with Status Pending is make you think. We want you to feel as though you're connected to the case. We want you to feel something.
The cases we're going to cover have discrepancies of some sort, and may or may not be well known.
They are either unsolved, prematurely closed, or open without any solid leads.
We want to get these stories out to the public, for the family and for the victims.
Join us every month for a different case, which will be a different chapter in our podcast, as we take a 3-part look into the facts.
We'll have interviews, expert opinions, and more. And we'll also be looking for suggestions from you for cases to take on as we move forward.
You can email us at statuspendingpodcast@gmail.com.
And you can subscribe to Status Pending wherever you listen to podcasts.